Welcome back to the show. I'm so honored you decided to spend some time with us today. Remember to check out our sponsor of today's episode, Safeguard Recruiting. They're owned and operated by law enforcement for law enforcement. They have the solutions to your recruiting needs. You can check them out at safeguardrecruiting.com. I'm excited about today's special episode, Election 2024, and I couldn't think of anyone better to bring on the show than Zeke Arkham. Zeke's a police officer, bodybuilder, political commentator, but more importantly, he's a husband and he's a father. He's one of the most influential voices on social media when it comes to politics, culture, and the state of our union, and I'm honored to have him. Zeke, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Thank you so much for the intro. Thank you.
Well, man, thanks for doing it. And you're in law enforcement. You have this big voice on social media. It's a voice that I think many people probably recognize, and I'm glad they're able to put a face to it and to hear you talk to us today. But you weren't always that, right? I mean, but long before that, you were something else. So sort of walk us into your career and your life and your family. There was probably a trigger point for you, right, where you made a decision that you needed to start speaking out. It's a courageous decision. We talk about courageous leadership here all the time, and it's courageous because it's not easy. It's courageous because you get attacked verbally mainly. But so you probably had to make that decision knowing the consequences. But was there an event where you made the decision to go, I'm going to do something more than just complaining to my friends or family. I need to start speaking out.
Well, I mean, yeah, basically I was on social media. I was on my personal Facebook page, and I was very political, talking to my family and friends. I'm sure a bunch of them probably had me muted because they didn't want to hear about it anymore. But I kept hearing that I should take my views to a bigger stage just because I had a lot to say. And I looked around and I saw that there was really no one else with my perspective. You know, you had other guys out there who, you had Brandon Tatum out there who is a cop, who's a black man who was giving a perspective on law enforcement. But there was no one really in the Northeast. I'm New York born and bred. I work for a tri-state agency now, but I was out there in the streets. I was out there putting my hands on people, and I figured, you know what? Let me get out there and start telling my story. So I started telling my story just from my perspective. And everyone always asks, how did you get such a large following? And my answer to him is always, I have no idea. I just started posting, and more people started tuning in. And that's where it started. I just figured there's a lot of lies and misconceptions out there as far as policing goes. A lot of people who presented themselves as law enforcement experts really had no idea what they were talking about. So I decided to just get out there and start telling the truth. No, there's not racism in the locker room. No, there aren't good cops hiding in the corner while the bad cops are openly plotting their nefarious deeds, like you see in the movie theaters. There's this whole big misconception as far as policing goes, as far as being a conservatarian goes, and I just decided to tell my story, just to really put the truth out there. There's no my truth or your truth. There's the truth. So I figured it had to be told, and that's what I started doing.
Well, I, for one, am thankful you're doing it. I wrote an article about Brandon way back in 2015 when nobody knew who Brandon Tatum was, and that thing went pretty crazy. Next thing you know, it's history, right? So Brandon's doing very well out there, and he's also a voice. But Zeke, you resonate with so many people, and I got to tell you, you probably didn't understand how dangerous this truth is, because I have to agree with you. You just call balls and strikes, right? You're just saying how it is. Why do you think so many people get upset by that?
I think because there's sort of an unspoken social order where you're not supposed to go against, quote unquote, your people, especially in the Black community. You're not supposed to say things that sort of, I guess, dispel the victimhood narrative. I remember, I'll tell you a story. I had a girlfriend way back in high school, and she was Asian. And I was complaining to her about another person who was Black. And I remember an older Black person, or an older Black woman, pulled me aside and was like, but you're not supposed to put our business out there to other people. And I was like, yeah, but this is my girlfriend, yeah, but you're not supposed to. So I think there's sort of a social order where you're not supposed to put the grievances out and say, hey, listen, your house is dirty, clean it. And that's basically what I do on a daily basis. I don't fall for the victimhood narrative. I don't fall for I have to blame all of my problems on things that my great grandparents went through. Slavery isn't a millstone around my neck that I have to carry. I don't carry that chip on my shoulder. I'm out here the same as everyone else, getting up, putting my boots on, going to work, coming back home, have a family I got to take care of, have a daughter I want to see be safe, have, dreams, aspirations. I guess I appeal to everyone just because I'm taking race out of it. I mean, except for when it calls for it. I have no problem calling anyone on their BS. But, my story is the same as everyone else's. I'm no different. And I think that's what resonates with a lot of people. Here's this guy who isn't falling for the victim narrative. He's this guy who's just out there talking about how he likes to barbecue on the weekends. And, I got to go to my daughter's dance recitals and I'm bored for half the day because, I'm just waiting for my daughter to get on stage. I'm talking about the same things as everyone else. And I'm doing it from a blue collar perspective, which is, what a lot of people identify with. So I guess that's where a lot of people just identify.
And I think that has been what is so troubling to me is seeing the divide in the country, the divide coming from politicians and the media mainly, because unfortunately there's people that still believe what the media tells them, still believes what politicians tell them and I'm like you, Zeke, I've traveled around the country. This divide doesn't really exist. Black, white, Asian, you name it. Everybody's just trying to get along or trying to go to work. They're trying to raise their family. But the media and the narrative and the messaging is so opposite. I had a seminal event, and it was, I can't remember the year, but it was George Bush's second term when he beat John Kerry. They had the whole Florida debacle. But the election night, I was at work. I'll never forget where I was because I didn't realize some of the things you just talked about, Zeke. At the time, I'd been on 7 years on the police department. Thought I'd been around the block. I clearly hadn't. I'm in a booth at a pizza place, and I'm eating with a friend of mine on duty. And there's a African-American family behind me, mom, dad, kids, and they're sitting there. And the TV's on with the election. And the mom turns to the entire family and says, "We cannot have George Bush win. If George Bush wins, he's going to try to come for all of us. The entire black race may end." And she starts going down this litany of things. And I thought to myself, what world have I been in? Because I got to tell you, Zeke, you're at a disadvantage. I can vote for whoever I want to vote for, and nobody's really going to get mad at me. I don't think people realize in the black community to vocally say you're going to vote for the Republican Party, that doesn't garner you a lot of favor. And I think that is so unfortunate. I'll just be clear with you. I think that is sad that in America, that is there. Like, people should be able to vote for whoever they want to vote for and not worry about repercussions. What's your thoughts on that?
I agree. There's no set rule saying I have to vote for someone just because the majority of black folk are voting for that person. There's no set rule. It's, at least in my mind, that says I have to think, speak, and act a certain way just because I'm black. No, I do what I want to do. I go out there, I vote how I want to vote. I listen to whatever music I feel like listening to. I speak, talk, act, think the way I want to, just because I'm free. I'm a free man. I do what I want to do. That's something I impress upon my daughter. That's something that when I mentored and I had a lot more time, I could mentor kids from the community I worked in. I would do such a thing. Hey, listen, man, there's no set rule that says you have to do something. And that's just the message I spread to everyone. That's the message I whenever I post, whenever I do my podcast, whenever I do my video rants, that's something that I say over and over and over again. And thankfully, a lot more people are starting to wake up. And a lot more people are starting to say, hey, listen, I don't have to vote for this person just because they share a skin tone with me, or because they share a melanin count with me, or because we have a common ancestor somewhere in Africa, or who knows, whatever. You don't have to do that. You go out there, you do whatever you have to do. And thankfully, a lot more people are waking up. It's refreshing to see, because honestly, the narrative that I have to do something because it's the black thing to do, or it's because it's the quote unquote right thing to do, is tiring. I remember, again, in my personal Facebook page where I used to rant and things to my family, I had a cousin of mine say, you know what, you got to remember, you were black before you were a cop. And I didn't really, at the time, I didn't know how to respond to that. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was a logical fallacy, but I didn't know how to respond to that. So I brought it to someone who I respect, and I respect his views and his opinion. And this happens to actually be a white guy. I brought this to him, just having a heart to heart. And he said, yeah, that may be true. You were black before you were a cop, but the truth is always the truth, regardless of race or occupation or anything else. And that was something that always stuck with me. The truth is always the truth. The truth transcends your race or your career, what you think is the right thing to do. Like Oprah says, your truth. No, there's the truth, and it transcends everything. And that's always the right side to be on.
Yeah, and I guess it attacks people's worldview, right? If you thought a certain way, because I've turned around that booth and tried to talk logic, they would not have heard of it, right? And so I guess truth, when it attacks the worldview, people want to defend that, right? They want to defend that worldview. But I think that's why your voice resonates, Zeke, is you are a free man. You're speaking what a lot of people, quite frankly, in the black community believe, but you're speaking out about it. I do sense a swell of people that aren't buying into this narrative, right? And I think it's people like yourself and Brandon and others that had the courage to speak out to make other people feel like, okay, I can do this or that. But the vast majority of African Americans still vote one way. That's certainly their right. But I've always been amazed at the reasoning, because when you look historically, things don't, oftentimes they're just not, the promises are false, right? The promises are false. And I'm not saying Republicans could improve it. I think some of the policies and ideas definitely can improve it. But I look at a city like Chicago, they voted Democrat, 60 years, and the city is just getting worse and worse and worse. Is there ever like a trigger that says, okay, nothing's getting better? Every 4 years we get promised this, but nothing's getting better. Maybe we should think a different way. Sometimes it takes someone like you to make them think that, but will people come to this on their own based on this? Like, how bad does it have to get? How bad does it have to get before people change their mind? We're liable to see it tomorrow, Tuesday, that people are going to vote based on how bad it is. What's your thoughts on that?
Honestly, I wish I had more of an answer for you, because me personally looking at it, if you destroyed things and screwed things up royally for 8 years, why would I then turn around and want to vote for your predecessor or someone that you're endorsing or someone that you're saying, yeah, you know what, vote for this guy. He's going to do the exact type of job I've done. Why would I do that? Why wouldn't I vote for the guy who turns around and says, you know what, vote for me. What have you got to lose? Things are already bad. What have you got to lose? That makes sense to me. You look at what Biden has done over the past 4 years, and you look at Kamala Harris, who is sitting right next to him as he was doing it. And you have people who complain about how high the gas is or how expensive groceries are or how high the mortgage rates are. You have people who are actively complaining about that who still want to turn around and vote for the same person who directly contributed to that. And they look for ways, they do mental gymnastics in order to somehow justify why they're voting for this person. I don't understand it. I don't get it. But maybe it's not for me to understand or get. Maybe it's just like, you know what? I'm not supposed to understand it. It's not supposed to make sense to me. I look at things logically. I look at things through a lens of the truth. I don't vote based on feelings. I don't do anything except for, when it comes to family issues, do anything when it comes to feelings. I look at facts. I look at logic. I look at what's the sensible thing to do going forward. And the sensible thing to do would be to vote for the person where during his time in office, gas was cheap, groceries weren't as expensive, mortgage rates were lower, unemployment was down. You got to look at these things. You got to look at them sensibly. I don't care about felonies through a weaponized justice system. I don't care about what someone did in their personal business. I care about what they did for the country while they were in charge. And if you look at Trump, love him or hate him, while he was in charge, things were pretty good in this country. Things were pretty good around the world. And then as soon as Biden showed up, you have Russia acting out. You have China acting out. You have terrorists in the Middle East acting out. Do you think Kamala Harris is going to go there with strength and confidence? She can't do one of her own rallies with strength and confidence. She can't attract 200,000 people to a venue like Madison Square Garden by herself. She's got to get Beyonce to help her out. She's got to get Taylor Swift to help her out. She's got to get people who are showing up for the Beyonce concert. And then afterwards, hear a couple words from the person you're supposed to be here to see. No, Trump shows up and Trump can pack someplace like Madison Square Garden on his own. Kamala Harris can't do that. So you expect me to believe that now she can walk with confidence and tell a terrorist cell in the Middle East, you better not act up or else you don't know how I'm going to act in response to you? No, she's weak. And that's what people have to look at. That's what people really have to keep in mind when they're looking at who's going to be leading this country for the next 4 years.
Yeah, I was cracking up last week when her surrogate was floating to the media that she's in negotiations with Joe Rogan. I looked at my wife and I said, she can't do Joe Rogan. She can't sit there for 3 hours and have a conversation. I go, they're just throwing that out there to make it seem like they're trying. I go, there's no way they're going to do it. Of course, they aren't going to do it. And Zeke, I'm obsessed with what makes people courageous. And whether you want to acknowledge it or not, you are unique in that you're willing to stand boldly on the truth, no matter the consequences. And maybe the consequences are just people call you bad names, but there's still consequences, right? Being in law enforcement, there can be consequences telling the truth. And so I'm obsessed with people that have your character and the things inside of you, because when you talk about, I mean, you remind me so much of myself, and I've been in plenty of trouble with telling the truth. In fact, one of the big principles those that have been paying attention to us here at Courageous Police Leadership is it's facts over emotion. You must make decisions based on facts, because emotion, rarely anything good comes of it. You just mentioned that. What do you think it is about you that makes you different? Whether you know it or not, you are different. There's very few Zeke Arkhams out there. Was it how you were raised? Was it your education? What do you think it is inside you that makes you go, I've got to stand for the truth no matter what?
Honestly, I don't think anything really makes me different. I think people just see a lot of themselves in my post, that I'm saying things that they're thinking. You know, that's why I said the thing about the truth is just people recognize the truth. You don't have to bend to the truth. You don't have to do mental gymnastics in order to justify the truth. You don't have to sort of work your way around. The truth is just there. You put it out there. I think what makes my story unique is that I'm telling a story from someplace where I've actually been. I've actually been in police locker rooms. I've actually spoken to cops all around the country. I've actually been in places that people only see on TV. I'm actually able to tell the truth of what goes on in these things. And, you know, I'm not saying it because someone told me. I'm not saying it because I read it in a book somewhere. I'm not some professor who I'm thinking about what could possibly happen. I have this perfect scenario in my head, and I'm going to say this, and I think that this is how it should be. No, I know things go sideways. Any cop can tell you, yeah, you can talk about it in a classroom. You can describe what you think should happen. You can go on based on what you saw in a movie somewhere. But until you're actually on scene, you have no idea what's going to happen. You have no idea you'll have no clue as to what it takes to actually solve that crime, to bring everything together so that, you know, you can get someone to justice. I remember I had training in Alabama, and I knew nothing about Alabama at the time. You know, here I am, this New York guy, this city slicker who had only really traveled to a couple of spots in the South. And I had training in Alabama. My first thought was, oh, my Lord, there's going to be places I can't go to. There's going to be sundown towns. You know, there's going to be all kinds of things happening. You know, I'm going to get called all kinds of names, you know. And I got in a plane. I get down there, and I found out that these were some of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. You know, I'm hanging out with some of the instructors who were native people from Alabama, who were some of the coolest people I've ever met. You know, at the last night, they invited us out to a barbecue at one of their houses. And, you know, I to this day, remember that night just because it was one of the best times I've ever had. You're sitting there, you're eating barbecue, you're talking to people from around the country, you're talking to people from other countries. And, you know, I just want to recreate that time every time I talk to people, or, you know, I have a podcast, I'm talking to someone from a different part of the country, or I'm talking to someone who may not even think the same way I do, but, you know, we can agree on certain things. I just want to recreate that because it was such a cool moment, such a great time. And I learned that day that I shouldn't judge people based on where they're coming from or their background, or, you know, if they were raised differently than I am. You know, you just, what brings us all together is that we're Americans. And if you love this country, if you're a patriot, if you want the best for this country, if you have children who you just want to leave them a better country, even if you have, you know, nieces, nephews, stepchildren, whatever, and your goal is just to leave them a better country, or even if you have no one, and you look around and you just want to do the best thing by the country, great. That's the foundation we can start on. That's the foundation we can build a friendship on. And we're not going to agree on everything, but you know what? We can agree on some things, and that's the best part of it.
Well, what you just described, I mean, I think I've got a few years on you, more than a few. That's kind of how things were, man. Like growing up in the 80s and starting my career in the early 90s. And that was kind of how it was. I think it switched in 2011, 2012. It's been a good decade now where you don't have to agree with everything the other person says. You can still get along. You have more in common than uncommon. You could vote for one person. I could vote for the other. We can be on opposite sides of the aisle. You could be gay. I could be straight. We could still get along. What happened in this country to where you now have to hate the other person if they don't agree with everything you have to say, or you know, the word inclusivity means you better agree with me or else. I mean, what do you think happened with that phenomenon?
I think what happened is what I call the rise of the activist. All of a sudden, everyone was an activist. All of a sudden, you were an activist for this. You were an activist for that. You know, you have to be an activist for, you know, I don't know, children in Rwanda or something. You know, somebody, you had to become an activist. And I remember I read an article. I don't remember who wrote the article or where it was from. But basically, the person who wrote the article said that people nowadays are in a position where they need something to fight for. A good friend of mine, Leonidas Johnson, has a book where he described St. George the Dragon Slayer, where, you know, the legend of St. George was that he was the best dragon slayer out there. And he wound up slaying all the dragons out there. So there were no more dragons to slay. So now he finds himself to be irrelevant because all the dragons are gone. So now in order to get relevancy, everything became a dragon. If there's a broken windmill, that's a dragon. If the well ran dry, that's a dragon. You know, he made everything a dragon. And that's basically what's going on now with kids in the Gen Z generation, and everyone wants to be an activist. They'll create problems in order to be the one who solves them. And even if there are no problems, even if you have a great life, even if you're comfortable, you have to create a problem because now you have to be the one to fix it. You know, it's no longer something where, you know, in the generation of my parents or grandparents, there was a civil rights struggle where they were bona fide fighting for rights that they didn't have. That's kind of how I red pilled my mom. I said, Ma, what rights don't you have right now that white people have, that anybody else has? What rights don't you have? And my mom actually really had to think about that because as someone who grew up during the civil rights struggle, she was used to just having that perspective. And she had to think about it. And she said, you know, you're kind of right. There's nothing I'm fighting for. I said, yeah, Ma, you know, so why have this stance? And, you know, she kind of got red pilled off of that. And that's usually just what I tell people nowadays. What rights are you fighting for right now? We're not talking about individual racism because people are allowed to be individually racist or have whatever biases they have, fine. But what systemic biases, what systemic racism is out there where you have to overcome this hurdle now? You know, they're not lynching people in the South anymore. The Klan is a joke nowadays. There is no real white supremacist group out there or any sort of supremacist group out there where now you have to actively fight them because they're actually out there trying to kill you. What's out there? Nothing. So stop turning everything into a dragon. But you have these activists out there who now want something to fight for, who need something to fight for because they want to give themselves some sort of relevancy. And that's where everything started to fall apart because you gave people like Al Sharpton a renewed voice. You gave Sean King a voice. You gave all these other people, the Rachel Dolezals, all the, you know,
Sean
a voice.
King, man. But Sean King cracks me up. The idea that
he's got me blocked on social media, so I have no idea what he says nowadays.
The idea that a guy that dumb can make $1 drives. I mean, that's the beauty of America right there. Sean King can make a living. To be honest with you, man, oh man.
No, and listen, in a righteous society, he would be broke. Al Sharpton would be broke. But you know what though? I mean, but Booker T. Washington described that way back during his time. He said there's a class of black person who they profit off of racism. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but they profit off of racism. Sean King, who's a writer, isn't that much of a writer. I've read his stuff that has nothing to do with race. He's not a good writer at all. but he needs to profit off of race. Al Sharpton has spent his entire life profiting off of race. All these other people, Tariq Nasheed, all of them profit off of race. They need racism to be a thing, so it gives them some sort of relevancy. If I were to snap my fingers today and say, you know what, all racism is gone, these people would fight with everything they had to bring it back. So this is what we're dealing with right now, and this is why things are so divided.
Yeah, I kind of called that probably 10 or 15 years ago, when you look around and you go, man, things are pretty good. I mean, it was very hard to find, like I said, there's individual races, but it was sort of really, you had to look. And I told my wife, I go, this is the most dangerous time, because there are people that profit off this that have to keep this going. So you're going to see the hoaxes. You're going to see the noose in the NASCAR that ended up not being a noose. You're going to see the Jesse Smollett's. You're going to see all this stuff continue to happen. And that is extremely unfortunate. You said something a few minutes back, Zeke, and I know why you have your own podcast, man. You are good. So you can take over for me one day for sure, tomorrow. But you talk about the civil rights era, and the kids today, you talk about the kids today needing to be activists. They literally have no clue. I set my kids down every Martin Luther King Day, and we watch Selma together as a family. Incredible movie. I recommend it for everybody. And I'll never forget the first year my kids watched that. I mean, my oldest is 24, so they're not too young. They looked at me. They said, this happened? Like, they have no idea. No idea. And I would assume that's all everybody in that generation. Like, the idea that there is inherent issues in this country, when you look back to when there were extreme inherent issues, I had to explain to them, whites and blacks were different water fountains. They couldn't go. And of course, we watched the Jackie Robinson movie about 100 times, one of my heroes, that and Frederick Douglass. None of people know about Frederick Douglass, one of the greatest orators of our time. But the kids today, you're right, they almost have to manufacture it, because they literally, the uneducation of what we have come from, the idea that we're having this kind of conversation, Zeke, after the history of this country, says how great this country is it not?
I mean, listen, here's a story I love telling. I tell it every chance I get, just because it shows the wisdom of the past compared to the present. But my great granddad grew up in 19, I forget the year, I think 1930s, 1920s, Virginia and North Carolina, where he experienced bona fide racism. I mean, like racism that I've only read about in books. Yeah. And I remember I just graduated from college, and I thought I'm putting on a clinic for my entire family. I graduated from college. I'm full of all kinds of anger and activism. Myself, I fell victim to it. Because I had a couple of professors who made it their business to make sure that we were all activists. I had two in particular who, you had your final grade was based on how angry you were when writing your final paper on activism and things like that. So they made sure you graduated a certain way and thinking a certain way. So here I am. I'm now full of all this anger, and I'm putting on a clinic, or so I think, for my family. My granddad's there, who actually marched to Washington. My great granddad's there, who I told you his history. And I remember my great granddad just put his hand on my hand to stop me. And he goes, always be the last person in the room to call something racist. Because if you call everything racist, then nothing is racist. But if you save that accusation for when it really counts, it'll be so much more powerful. And then he just started talking about something else. Like, just stopped me right there, dead in my tracks, Yeah. And I'll admit, for a week, I was butthurt. For a week. What
a powerful statement, man. What a powerful statement.
Yeah, of course. But this is, for a week, I was mad until, you get that voice in the back of your mind. Like, this guy experienced bona fide racism. The likes that you don't have, you have no idea what it's about. So who are you to tell him what's racist and what isn't, or what he should be mad about? And I think at that moment, I stopped. That was the last time I ever unnecessarily called something racist. And
well, he was a prophet, because sadly we're in those times, right? The racism thing doesn't even affect anybody now. I mean, Zeke, who would have known then that you'd be called a white supremacist on Twitter, right? Who would have known that?
Oh, I get called a Nazi. I get called
Yeah,
a black white supremacist all the time.
crazy,
So
man.
much that you know, my great granddad was right. It
Yeah,
means nothing now, you
yeah.
know, and that's actually a huge insult to people who experience bona fide racism, because now if they're calling something out, it's ignored. So these people, these activists, are doing a disservice to people who are actually experiencing it.
Yeah, I made the mistake of pointing out a Roland Fryer study one time, and man, you'd have thought the world was ending when I did that. I mean, I'm like, it's a peer-reviewed research, fellas. That did not matter for sure. But Zeke, the source of this, how much do you put on the media? I mean, I'll tell you my point of view first. I think that if we ever look back in America and talk about the democracy we once were, which I hope doesn't happen, it will be because of the media. I think they're probably truly one of the most horrific stains on our society today, the way the mainstream media acts. I put a lot of this on the media. You know, kids are influential. People watch the news. They're clearly, it's a brainstorming mechanism, right? Or brainwashing mechanism. And the CIA has been involved in this through the years. We won't go down that track, but the CIA has been embedded inside the mainstream media for the last 50 years in this country to send out certain messages, and people fall for that. So I put more blame on the messengers than I do the people that receive the message and get fooled, so to speak. But I put a lot of this, what we just talked about, on the media. What about you?
Oh, absolutely. Joseph Goebbels, who was Adolf Hitler's Minister of Information, would be astounded at what is going on today, even him, because he was the I guess the godfather or grandfather or whoever of using a state controlled propaganda, but it's nothing like what goes on today. I think my wife was astounded to look at the fact that 90% of the coverage towards Trump has been negative, and over 90 has been positive towards Kamala Harris. They definitely are putting themselves into this struggle. They're definitely putting someone as the good guy, as the bad guy. I mean, just look at when a white cop happens to shoot a black perp. You know, that the white cop could do everything correctly, but the media is still gonna put out there a white cop. They'll make sure they highlight and bold his race. A white cop shot a black unarmed person. And when people ask me about this, my response back to him is always, "Hey, listen, I'm 6'2". I'm 275 pounds. I work out a lot. You know, you would say I'm stronger than the average person walking around out there. If I get into a fight with a cop who's 5'10", 170 pounds, and I'm pummeling him, it's going to hurt. And if he pulls out his gun and shoots me as a last resort because there's no stopping me, he's justified, in my opinion. You know, but what the media does, they say, oh, this white cop shot this black person, and then they'll get my picture from high school where I'm sitting there, hey everyone, and if they could put an angel halo around my head and some wings, they would do so. Or they go out and they find the people who are closest to me and go, no, he was a great person. He was such a wonderful, loving person. This shouldn't have happened to him. No, look at Mike Brown. He had literally just finished robbing someone when he got shot. Like literally just finished robbing someone. You look at the rest of these perps out there who get themselves shot by cops. They're not good people, but they go out, they find their high school picture, or they find their wedding photo. They get, oh, he was such a wonderful. No, he wasn't. He was a criminal. So
well, it's so maddening
because
complicit. I was teaching a college class just the other day, and I went through all the litany of lies, Breonna Taylor and Michael Brown. And you'd have thought, I mean, these kids had never heard that. And what frustrates me is there's not a debate there. I mean, I'm quoting grand jury testimony from Breonna Taylor. I mean, there's no accountability. Like they can sit there and turn this narrative on. It's, of course, debunked a year later, 2 years later. Heck, every year we steal about Michael Brown's birthday from all the politicians, and they know it's a lie. They know it's a lie, and they're able to keep doing it. And it's done so much damage, Zeke. Going back to Roland Fryer, he's shown that there have been more African Americans killed with depolicing based on this narrative. Depolicing comes from a media narrative. They call it the Ferguson effect was the other thing they call it. But I don't have any answers other than convincing the public you've got to stop watching the mainstream media. You have to stop watching the mainstream media. In fact, anybody that's listening to this or watching this that has a question, when they get sued for defamation, do you know how they get out of it? They say it's opinion. So your mainstream media channels you're watching, they don't even admit in court it's news. They say it's their opinion, so they're protected. That's how they can get away with doing all this. They couch it as opinion. But the problem is they don't start off by saying this is my opinion. They say it's the news. And I don't know an answer because I think they've killed themselves. Most people don't trust the media. I don't know how they're in business. Obviously, podcasts like yours and others are much more popular, but they're still in business and they're going to be financed by the people that want to finance it. So they'll probably be around. But the only answer I know, Zeke, and I'm sure you've told others, you've got to stop watching this. You know, I tell my kids, hey, don't ever get your news from one source. Figure out the truth. And you have to watch, unfortunately, multiple newscasts to do it and dive deeper into it because they're lying to you predominantly. But the damage they're doing, I just need our audience to know, and you said it, Zeke, in law enforcement in our country is insurmountable, the damage they've done.
Well, you look at what's going on in major blue cities across America, in Chicago, LA, New York, Baltimore, St. Louis. You look at what's going on in major law enforcement departments. And they're all having staffing problems because no one wants the job anymore. You look at the military, they're having staffing problems because no one wants that job. So what are we going to do? We have no military, you have no police. What are you going to do? I said this last week on my podcast, actually. Do you know how many people would crap themselves if there was an actual purge? Do you know how many people would if the government just said, hey, listen, we have no more cops. So from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., we're not answering any phone calls. You can call 911 all you want. We can't show up until the next morning. Do you know how many people would panic themselves into the worst conniption they've ever had in their lives because there's no cops? Well, guess what? This is what you're pushing yourself towards when you vote for people like Kamala Harris, who had her Minnesota Freedom Fund. When you vote for Tim Walz, who allowed his state to burn because people were rioting during the BLM Summer of Love riots of 2020. When you elect these Democrat socialists who run on an anti-cop platform, this is what you're voting for. You're voting for a potential purge. People don't realize that. They think there's always going to be cops they can just pick on and beat up on and protest for and walk down the street and think that they're fighting for justice. Yeah, well, guess what? When no one wants the job anymore, and there's staffing problems, like what's going on in a lot of commands I'm talking to across the country. I have cops reaching out to me from across all over the country saying, yeah, I've worked doubles and triples because there's no one else to be there to replace me and take my place. I'm turning out roll calls that I used to be able to turn out 20 cops out into the streets. Now I'm lucky if I have 10. When you have people, when you have departments who are facing these kind of staffing problems, all it does is backfire on your community. But keep voting the AOCs in there who openly hate cops. Keep voting, the rest of these Democrat socialists out there who run on these anti-cop platforms. Keep voting squad members in there who have more sympathy towards the robber than the person they robbed. Keep voting for these judges who think that, these hardened criminals just need a warm fuzzy and a hug. Keep voting for them because the purge right now is on TV, but it can definitely wind up at your doorstep if you keep voting the way you vote.
Yeah, if you don't think leadership matters, there actually is communities right now in this country, one of them being in St. Louis, where the police don't even respond, and it's coming. You have more and more municipal agencies that are having to contract with sheriff's departments because they can't handle it. There's a sense of this, Zeke, that's being done on purpose, right? When you talk about defund police, when you use the federal government to do consent decrees to run cities, 14 of the top 20 most violent cities are ran by the Department of Justice as we speak. My fear is it's being done on purpose to destroy the profession. So then guess what the federal government does? Oh, we have your answer. It's called a national police force or whatever. That's when it really happens. You follow the history of Nazi Germany. That's how they were able to accelerate that. They decommissioned many of the local agencies. They made a national police force. I could go on and on. Very spooky, but we haven't even gotten to the election. Let's get to it real quick. Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, it's tomorrow. Man, everyone's nervous. Everybody has anxiety. I think what troubles me so much is grown adults just flat out lying. I mean, you look at the hoaxes they've done on Donald Trump. These are hoaxes that you could literally watch a 15-second soundbite and immediately go, well, that's a lie. I mean, they just turned up. I just saw on MSNBC, they're talking about another Russia hoax, right? This is Russia hoax number 3. What is going on in people's heads, Zeke? I mean, because clearly it's almost half the country. I hope it's not half the country. I hope it's about 49.9% of the country and 51.1 is voting the other side. We'll find out tomorrow. Why are people being so duped and just falling for these lies? Is it a self-confirming prophecy? They just hate Donald Trump. So whatever's said about him, they're just going to jump on it. Because, you know, the fine people hoax, the bloodbath hoax, the Russia hoax. There's more hoaxes, but that's all the Democratic Party's leaning on. They're not telling us what they're going to do. They just keep coming back to these hoaxes, and the media has their back. What do you think is going on where people are so easily just falling for this?
Because it's like you said, the media is out there putting out a certain narrative. You know, I've talked to my friends, my family about the actual facts out there, and they don't believe it until I have to show them receipts. No, he didn't say there were good people on both sides. Been talking about actual white supremacy, almost riots and protests that were taking on in Charlottesburg, Virginia.
Yeah, he actually disavows white supremacy in the sentence before that. And then he goes to say that.
Yeah, but the media cuts it down to literally a 3-second soundbite, and they're trying to make him look like he's on the side of these white nationalists. You know, you have a comedian who shouldn't have even been invited to Madison Square Garden, but makes a joke, and now all of a sudden they're trying to attribute it towards Donald Trump. No, Trump didn't say that, and his people disavowed.
Hinchcliffe was up there like 5 hours before Trump. He was like the opening guy 5 hours before the president went up. And I can guarantee you Donald Trump does not know who Tony Hinchcliffe is. I guarantee you that.
No, but now all of a sudden this is being attributed to Trump. You know, you've got people who are one of my wife's friends who I would love to interview on a podcast because she's actually intelligent and would have something to say. But again, she turns around. She's a huge liberal and calls it a white supremacy rally at Madison Square Garden. Well, yeah, okay. I didn't know Byron Donalds, was a white supremacist. I didn't know Vivek Ramaswamy was a white supremacist. I didn't know all the Jewish people and Hispanic people and Black people and Asian people and everybody else who showed up, all the different ethnicities who showed up to Madison Square Garden were all white supremacists. I didn't know white people who don't have a racist single bone in their body were white supremacists. So this whole narrative has to stop. People don't look up facts anymore. Like I tell people all the time, listen, I'm not an influencer. I don't want to be an influencer. I want to try to point you in the right direction of where you can get your facts from, but don't let my opinion be what you see as fact. You have to go out there and look it up for yourself. That's exactly what I did. I went out there and I looked it up for myself. And that's how I came to my conclusion. I want people to go out there and look at things for themselves. Don't trust one source. Don't look at Fox. Don't look for something that's just going to back up your point of view. Look at different views. Look at why people feel the way they feel. Look at what this person is presenting as facts and see be your own fact checker. Don't look at Snopes. Don't look at PolitiFact. Don't look at anything else. Look at the facts that are in front of you and make the decision for yourself. If you're calling an MSG rally with a bunch of different ethnicities a white supremacist rally, there's something wrong with you.
We didn't even know that there was a 1939 rally at the Madison Square Garden, right? Until the media tells us that.
Actually, I did because I do read a lot of history.
Okay.
Excuse me. So I actually knew about that, but what people don't know is that Woodrow Wilson screened Birth of a Nation, which is basically a love letter towards the Ku Klux Klan at the White House. People don't go at Woodrow Wilson like that. What I do know is that Lyndon B. Johnson was a racist. What I do know is that he's the one who stopped the original Civil Rights Act, which had a lot more teeth.
The Democratic Party stopped it. The Democratic Party, they didn't vote for it.
No, but he directly stopped it because he didn't want it to destroy his party. And then he came out with another Civil Rights Act that didn't have as much of a bite to it. So a lot of people don't know that, but a lot of people, they like to think, oh, well, the party switched. Oh, well, this happened. Oh,
that's the craziest one right there. So
there was a
audience may not know what you're talking about. That's the craziest one to me. Everybody, Abraham Lincoln, Republican, but it's justified by this weird party switch. Explain that to our audience because that's the craziest one I've ever heard.
Well, apparently at some point in time, no one can actually point out when this happened, but apparently at some point in time, Democrats looked at Republicans, Republicans looked at Democrats and went, hey, you mind if we pull one of these moves? And everybody agreed and shook on it. And if you were a Democrat, you're now a Republican. If you're a Republican, you're now a Democrat.
And of course, they say that because Republicans champions abolition slavery, the Republicans champion the Civil Rights Bill, the Republicans champion all of this. So the only way you can justify this now is this weird switch thing, right?
Yeah. Oh, in my opinion, some dummy came out and said it, and it just took off.
Crazy.
You know, my thing is, did a couple Democrats become Republicans? Sure. Did a couple Republicans become Democrats? Sure. I'm not going to dispute that. But to say there was a party switch where they all kind of looked at each other and went, hey, yeah, we're going to, you know.
Yeah, this whole logic thing.
I'm going to take your office, you take mine. We're going to do all this. That didn't happen. So,
see, this whole logic thing has gotten you in a lot of trouble, I know, but I want to put it in a pill and give it to people, man. I really love it. And we're coming down to the end. I can't thank you enough for being here, but we got to get down to it, man. Tomorrow's the big day. Give me your prediction. Give me your prediction. We'll live forever in history on podcasts, right? What do you think is going to happen on Tuesday?
I think I have to believe Trump's going to take it. I have to believe that, just because I'm looking at the early numbers. They look really good for Trump. I'm hoping he does a full sweep of every swing state out there. I can see they're already trying to cheat. It's already out there. But I think the problem with what they did in 2020 is that they can't replicate it in 2024 without people catching on early and going, hey, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And people getting themselves way more involved. The problem with when you beat someone in a fight is that if they're smart, they learn from it. Now, do I think the GOP has learned from it? No. Do I think regular Americans have learned from it? Yes. So regular Americans are going to be way more vigilant this time and look at any kind of shenanigans and foolywang. They're going to be like, hey, listen, we're not going to have this go on. So I think Trump is going to take it. I think Trump is going to win. I have to believe that, because if we're looking at 4 years of Madam President Kamala Harris, which I almost threw up saying just now, if we're looking at 4 years of that, this country is screwed. The rest of the world is screwed. And if people are foolish enough to vote for Kamala Harris, then they better be ready for what comes along with it. We're talking about World War III. We're talking about Russia being bolder. We're talking about China being bolder. We're talking about North Korea being bolder. We're looking at terrorists being bolder. We're looking at worldwide economic disaster. People are going to have to understand what comes along with a Kamala Harris presidency. If you want to save this country, if you quite literally want to save this world, vote for Trump.
Well, and you're not mixing words there, and you're correct. What people don't understand is, if you think censorship's bad now, if you think using DOJ to go after your political opponents is bad now, if you think that there'll ever be a fair election ever again, vote for that person, Kamala Harris. Yeah, put her in office, because you've already seen what they've done with some power. You give them all the power. You've got the DOJ right now fighting Virginia to let illegals vote. They're showing you everything they're going to do, which is pretty crazy. I'm going to give my prediction real quick, Zeke. You can call me and laugh at me if I'm wrong. I say Trump takes 6 of the 7 swing states and he picks off a surprise. That's what I'm going to say. There's going to be a surprise state. He's going to pick one of those off. That's my prediction. Zeke, Arkham, man, I know we talked about a lot of stuff. If I didn't say it already, I want to say I appreciate your boldness and courage. You don't see it that way. That's the way courageous people are. That's just who you are. But that's what we're trying to do here. We need people to stand up, not for a political party, not for a person, just for the truth. That's all we want to do. The truth will set you free. And my faith tells me there is one truth. There's not multiple truths. There's no my truth. There is one truth. You are a light in a sometimes can be a very dark, dark world, sir. And I certainly appreciate you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your words. Thank you so much.
And before we forget, where can people reach out to you at? Where are you at? How can they contact you?
On Twitter or X, Zeke Arkham, ZeekArkham. That's my main social media platform. I'm also on Instagram, same handle, Zeke Arkham, where I do my video rants. But if you really want to reach out to me, anybody who wants to contact me, X is the way to go, because I do most of my trash talking right there.
All right, Zeke. Thank you so much, sir. And if you've been watching, If you've been listening, thank you for doing that. And just remember, lead on and stay courageous.